Hello, Gino here, and you are listening to Otherworld Connections. We live in a critical time where now, more than ever, angels and fairies, hidden forces, are bursting at the seams of the veil to work with us. They want to see us change in order to save the world and live in service to others. So join me on a journey to empowerment and enlightenment with an angelic angle and a fairy focus, looking into ways to improve our current situation, morality, archetypes, solutions for self-healing, and spiritual sciences in light of theosophy and other occult traditions.
Hello. Welcome back to Otherworld Connections. And today's show, we are looking at, well, I am, and you're listening to me looking at things. Bernard Rogers' book. I found the book, guys. I found the book. It's called The Initiatory Path in Fairy Tales. The Alchemical Secrets of Mother Goose. How did I not find this at least 1 year ago? How did I not find this 5 years ago? I go on Anna's Archive, LibGen, I type in fairy tales, I download the heck out of everything, and this one never popped up, and it's finally popped up. That's why it's important to persevere. But first off, you were just listening to Crosstalk with Sarah Cross. And you can check out her show on Wednesdays, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, Studio A, Revolution Radio. Right here, and she made some great points today, as I'm sure she does most days. I just don't get to listen most days. But recording yourself while talking and playing back, well, that is a great exercise in shadow work. Shadow work, we cover a lot of shadow work here on Otherworld Connections. And I just wanted to say that that is a great idea. And that's why I do say, if you're out there and you're a listener and you feel like you can do better, I'm sure you can. Speaking for myself, I'm sure you can. Why not get a slot and you can do that, and you can start your journey of self-reflection and healing by just going blah, blah, blah on the microphone and listening back. Cringe city perhaps, but hey, it's fantastic, and you might find you're fantastic at it, and you'll get fantastic at it. And then more of us here on Revolution Radio, more slots filled means a larger population of transmission of truth, which means a larger reception of the transmission, even if it's just down to a, collective unconscious level, which is where all the good stuff happens and comes from, right? And just a reminder that you can find the link to anything I read or refer to during the show in the description of this episode. Well, at the end of the day, we're basically just reading a book for the next, month. Because this is the Initiatory Path in Fairy Tales book. This is the book that I didn't know existed. I thought I was special. I thought I was cool. But as always, there's nothing new under the sun. And sometimes you get lost in yourself and you forget that. But this book has points and the theme of everything that I've been trying to achieve or working on in my life's work. Otherworld Connections and the Secret Kindergarten, where it's really starting to be super certain and sure that fairy tales really are the family inclusive way to teach the universal principles, those natural laws, to teach how to behave, to teach how things work. And here's the thing that's so crazy about fairy tales, as I say sometimes that they're a mandala, that they sort of, they reflect just the fact that they are what they are, reflects what natural law is like. They are initiatory, as some of the authors of some of the books that we've read have said, that they are initiation in themselves, where they are a fantasy story for children, when really there is actually a deeper meaning, as we know, if you've been listening to the show, or as you just may already know anyway. And then the message inside is about an initiation in our life. Oftentimes, it's when the child becomes 7 years old and is initiated into the next stage of child development. So, the story itself is initiation. The message underneath is about an initiation. So these are beyond genius, and as you know, I've said my theory is that, the people that wrote these were really tapping into their intuition, and from my experiences, they could only have been highly regarding young children in their communities, in their culture, for lack of a better term. Sarah Cross talked about culture and what that really is, and that's true. In their way of life, in their, collections of families that lived, on the heath together, whatever, with the cave. And so I think the fairy tales could only have been possible from an extremely high level or a deep intuition, and a lot of time spent in reverence and engagement and inclusion of young children, and young children leading the way. Which kind of means adults being more connected to nature, more playful and more creative and more patient, and putting children first. So that's, will this book focus on that in that regard? I'm not so sure, but we're going to find out. So we're going to read this book, basically. Okay, so let's figure this out. So the book again. The Initiatory Path in Fairy Tales, The Alchemical Secrets of Mother Goose, by Bernard Roger. Oh wait, is it Roger Bernard? Bring the book up, Gino. Let's have a look. Yes, Bernard Roger. Sorry, when people have a first name as a surname, I get confused. Okay, so I'm just going to literally just read this, and I'm going to have a lot to say. And if you have been following Otherworld Connections, you're going to get why I want to read this book, because I go through and I might choose like a few paragraphs or a chapter here and there. Well, everything I looked at, I was like, I want to read that. So we're just going to start from essentially the beginning. Bernard Roger, Mother Goose, and the Language of the Birds. And the Language of the Birds we have covered in Otherworld Connections. I feel like I'm missing something. I've already been blah blah blahing for 10 minutes. No, we're just going to go. Okay. From the Turba Philosophorum. Know ye that we have given many names to it, which are all true, an example of which, for those that possess understanding, is to be traced in corn that is being ground. For after grinding it, it is called by another name, and after it has been passed through the sieve, and the various substances have been separated one from another, each of these has its own name. And yet fundamentally there is but one name, to wit, corn, from which many names are distinguished. And that's from the Turba Philosophorum, which is, going to Wikipedia here, is known as the Assembly of the Philosophers, one of the oldest European alchemy texts, translated from Arabic. It is considered to have been written in 900 AD. And I'm pretty sure around that time there was a lot of translating to Arabic going on. And this is saying it's translated from Arabic? Yeah. So, don't know how that worked. They lost the European text. They found the Arabic translation and they put it back to thing. Anyway, I am not the person to ask about that. But there you go. The point of my story here is, this makes me think of Rudolf Steiner. Steiner talks about, how am I going to put this? Different names for the same thing in a way. I guess what I'm trying to say is if one was to write a fairy tale in 2025 that encoded natural law, they wrote it intuitively, you would have a different name for the same thing. Maybe it's a story about a particular natural law principle or a particular initiation along the path of, the human journey, the great work. And that's cool. And that's sort of what symbolism is like, right? Okay. The enigmatic Fulcanelli notes that the stories told by Mother Goose are hermetic narratives in which esoteric truth is combined with the marvelous and legendary decor of the Golden Age. Now we're going to have to just go to Fulcanelli. This guy from the 1920s. Active in the 1920s, was the name used by a French alchemist and esoteric author whose identity is still debated. Why is it when the identity is debated, you kind of get the feeling that it's got to be it's got to be legit? That is so funny to me. The name Fulcanelli seems to be a play on words. Vulcan, the ancient Roman god of fire, plus El, a Canaanite name for God, and so the sacred fire. There we go. Let's move along. The Golden Age. This Golden Age, the time when all animals had the power to communicate together, is also, as Bernard Roger indicates, identical to the first days of human existence. So we're all the way back to the first days of human existence. So when we look at these, the more untainted books about fairy tales and history or etymology origins, we end up to the beginnings of human existence with fairy tales. Okay? When humanity took the first step on its own path of initiation, knowledge of this primal language, more commonly known as the language of the birds, is essential for understanding the hidden meanings within alchemical texts, just as it is also indispensable for interpreting the symbology of any initiatory path, such as Freemasonry. Now, this is the context here is Freemasonry in this book. This guy's decoding of the fairy tales is he faces it off with his knowledge of Freemasonry. And, he finds that the shoe fits here too. This language, the language of the birds, is characterized by word games, puns, and homonyms that are used to simultaneously designate different actions and objects. This designated action or object, Roger notes, can simultaneously belong to planes of existence that are supposedly quite distant from each other. Fairy tales, whose own origins the author demonstrates can be traced back to these first days, also contain signs, clues, and counsels related to the operative phases of the great work and to the stages of the path of initiation, which we can say, this is a little bit of a vanity read here, because this is what we've been going over, in Otherworld Connections, true story. I'm feeling pretty proud of myself right now, guys. Phrases of the great work stage of initiation. His etymological investigations are the veritable descent. Pierre Mabille speaks of in his book The Mirror of the Marvelous, which makes it possible to regain the primitive ground that borders the central fire, or where the first incandescent desire found its form. Bernard Roger has been a trustworthy guide for the children of Hermes for over 50 years, and his considerable expertise in this field allows him to identify these signs, clues, and counsels as they appear in a body of lore, where they may be at least expected. In this book, he highlights these clues in the classic folk tales he has selected from the collections assembled by the brothers Grimm and Emmanuel Cosquin, among others. Emmanuel Cosquin is another one that didn't ring a bell. 1841 to 1919, a French folklorist. He wrote the popular tales of Lorraine. In the introduction, to which he argues for the theory that the development as well the origin of such tales is historically traceable to India. Take that with a massive pinch of salt because it is Wikipedia. I think he's historically tracing it to Indo-Europe. I think they just, you know how it goes, guys. All right. Aryan is the word I'm looking for. Aryan. All right. Where are we? The quoted material generally identifies terms known by the initiates as symbolic phrases that identify the alchemical path. The italicized material underscores analogous terminology used within the stories, which likewise identifies alchemical keys and coded phrases for those on the initiatic path. Introduced to alchemy when a member of the Surrealist group in Paris in the 1950s, Roger became friends with René Alloux, who at the time was giving lectures on alchemy at the Geographical Society on Boulevard Saint-Germain. These lectures were consistently attended by the Surrealists. Alloux, in return, began to join the group at their meetings and became a regular contributor to Medium, the Surrealist journal of that time. Oh, to be around in those days, everybody. Where it was in vogue to be a little bit kooky. The ties forged between Alloux and Roger proved significant as both men were instrumental in bringing modern translations of classic alchemical texts to a much broader audience. Until 1960, students of the art of music, a term used by initiates to conceal from clerical ears their pursuit of arts forbidden by the church, would have to diligently hunt for these texts in the dusty collections of old libraries. Their ready availability today can be partially traced back to the efforts of Bernard Roger, who translated important texts by Basil Valentin, Lamspring, and Francesco Satinelli. Texts that his mentor, Alloux, arranged to have published in his capacity as director of the Hermetic Library. He's qualified, okay? He's bloody qualified. I'm going to read the preface, I think. The preface. Okay. Not a moment of daily life goes by without the possibility of seeing dreamlike images behind our conscious thoughts. Reverie would be the most common example. There's that word again, guys. While the journey taken by the shaman could perhaps represent the extreme case, beneath our most logical discourses, the quote-unquote mouth of shadow is speaking non-stop from unknown cellars. True story. The lives of so-called primitive peoples long took place in mental regions where the beings of the day and the beings of the night spoke to each other. But even today there are circumstances in which modern Westerners find it possible to go beyond the normal waking state without having to cross through the portal of paradoxical sleep. This is notably the case with poetic creation. Shout out to Willow's Poetry Corner. But everyone can personally experience it if he or she knows how to lend an ear to certain old tales that, transcending the images on which our common culture is based, pierce the wall of contemporary assumptions and reveal their role as vehicles for an amazing ability to make both sides of the mirror visible simultaneously. Fairy tales are absolute genius. Nothing can top it. I don't think even film can top this. Is this ability due to some ancient imperious yen for emancipation that was responsible for the emergence of what would evolve into the human mind out of the ebb and flow of nature? Could it have been engendered by a light that shot out from what was the beginning of time for humanity? Hearing the tales that arise out of this light makes visible colors and intensities that vary according to the listener's sensitivity and cultural orientation. There's that different names for the same meaning, for the same thing. It is as if they were filtered through panes of glass, arranged in such a way as to cast on each individual the gleams to which he or she were most sensitive. The following study has no other ambition than to suggest, with the help of some examples, the possible existence of a certain lighting angle. But this does not mean that the teachings in these tales cannot be heard, albeit in a whisper, and will be overlooked. In one of these tales, a very haughty maiden always succeeds in finding, when looking out the magic windows of the highest tower of her palace, the hiding places of each of her suitors, even when they conceal themselves in the darkness and most secret spots of this vast world. And once she finds them, this same maiden takes great pleasure in always seeing that her unfortunate wooer is deprived of his head. The last prince, though, who was shrewder than his competitors, hid himself in her hair above the nape of her neck. Staying there, he proved impossible to find and caused her great distress. He was the one she wed. The exegesis of a story, true as it can be within the arcana of its own domain, will never be more than a suitor whose head may one day be lopped off, forever ephemeral, in contrast to the profound and silent impregnation with which these tales of a bygone age, the lifeblood of civilizations, enrich our unknown inner depths. Bit of word salad there. Fairy tales are important because reasons. Oh, but I hope you can see why I'm basically just reading the book here. Alrighty. The tales. Mademoiselle, people will not think it odd that a child took pleasure in writing the tales in this collection, but they will be surprised at his boldness in dedicating them to you. Nevertheless, mademoiselle, However great the distance between the simplicity of these narratives and the intelligence of your mind, if these tales are closely examined, it will be seen that I am not as blameworthy as I might first appear. They all contain a very sensible code of morality, which is discovered to a greater or lesser extent in accordance with the penetration of their readers. And this, the dynamic is to, it really is to change the world, to save the world, is for adults, obviously, to understand objective morality, obviously, and to try and live that, to understand the symbolism, to know these fairy tales and the importance of them, and to have some understanding of the decoding, and then to read them, which is spending time and attention on young children, and to read them to the kids. Not to direct the kids, now this is natural law, little Timmy. No, that is called indoctrination. You cannot indoctrinate moral and spiritual teachings. You can't do it because it's indoctrination. It's an oxymoron. So stop doing that, okay? Understand fairy tales, read fairy tales. If you feel like you need to read something to your kids to get them to learn things, it's fairy tales. Up until the 7 years, at least up until 7 years of age. It's fantasy. Fantasy is, everything's upside down in that world, okay? Everything is reversed. So you want your kids to know important things? Well, you've got to tell them outrageously wild, fantastical things. Everything's reversed. All right, this epigraph is from the epistle that opens the 1697 edition of Charles Perrault's Stories or Tales of Times Past, which was dedicated to Elizabeth Charlotte D'Orleans and written under the name of his son Pierre d'Amansour. However, the engraving on the book's frontispiece suggests another title. It is written in capital letters on a plate held by 4 nails to a door opening onto a room lit by both candlelight and the flame cast by a large fireplace. It reads, in French, Tales of My Mother, the Goose. Seated before the door, her head level with the keyhole, an old woman is spinning wool and telling stories to 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. A cat is blissfully warming itself in front of the hearth. It would be hard to find a more concise and more illuminating definition of these traditional tales than the one whose key Perrault gives here secretly, in a few words. Who in that time, the century when France was at its height of power, would have believed that stories that had been heard and heard over and over again by everyone, from the most insignificant peasant to the heir of the greatest lord, from the mouth of his wet nurse or grandmother, or even during communal gatherings, would have been invented by the child of a contemporary? This was not Perrault's intention. Wouldn't the child... I got excited when I heard that the fairy tales could have been documented by things that children said. Wouldn't the child to whom he attributed his collection rather bring to mind a certain level of consciousness that would vouchsafe a glimpse of panoramas customarily hidden from so-called adult perception? They all contain a very sensible code of morality, d'Amansour allegedly writes, which is discovered to a greater or lesser extent in accordance with the penetration of their readers. It is hard to believe that Perrault is speaking here of the superficial and conventional morals he places at the end of each of his tales. Wouldn't he instead be trying to evoke the plurality of meaning they reveal? Plurality, good word. Plurality of meaning they reveal, and the multiple domains toward which they extend their perspectives and whose secret woods they enter? It is one of these domains that we are going to try to visit, without overlooking the fact that many other directions, some of which have already been taken, would be equally rewarding. And my decoding of the fairy tales is, me, Gino 2025, based on what I know, and I think, my understanding of natural law to be able to, make the shoe fit without forcing it. It's just finding the definitions and the meanings of the symbols encoded in the stories. And as you have become aware, if you listen to my show, that it's quite effortless once you start getting the definitions, the thread, and all the symbols in them, they all kind of overlap in their meaning as well. So there's a larger, a strong theme that comes out from the decoding because of the plurality of the meaning of the symbols and the plurality of the symbols themselves. Different symbols having similar meanings. So yeah, it's profound. It's definitely it's just crazy. I don't even know what to say. Right, tales and legends. It is customary to label as legend the story of a fabulous fact attached to either a place, a nation, forest, lake, tree, spring, or stone, or historical figure. This fact is often dated and rooted with the memory of a clearly defined social group. The nature of legend is historical and sedentary. Sorry, just the EPUB reader's just having a bit of a moment. The tale, to the contrary, is a free traveller. Its origin is impossible to pin down, and its ubiquity has enthralled more than one folklorist. It is not rare for a specific theme to be found almost everywhere across the globe. In the observations that follow each of the tales in his Folk Tales of Lorraine, Emmanuel Koskin shows how he found the theme of Bear John, or its principal elements, in the most of the nations of Europe, in India, and in the four corners of Asia. Cinderella and Donkey Skin, in guises as varied as the nations and villages in which they can be found, enchanting the evenings of the entire old world. Episodes from The Green Bird or The White Cat can be found as far afield as Algeria, and old stories reminiscent of those found in Europe have been collected from the mouths of Native Americans with no demonstrable proof of any transmission between continents. There is nothing that can pin the origin of a tale down to this or that specific region of the world, although each region has always conferred its spirit and color to the story. I have given anecdotes of similar transmissions through my experiences in early childhood teaching, which set off this whole thing. Imaginary free play led by the children leads to certain styles of psychodramatic play that end up being exactly the same as other children's psychodramas with no transmission. of the story, the idea or the story. And that's how everything got spooky. Right. Nor is there anything to date its origin. The famous Once Upon a Time immediately introduces the reader into a space where no chronology applies, a perpetually renewing mythical time. Once upon a time. These words, René Lucien Rousseau writes, belong to a magic rite that transports us outside space into the timeless realm of the tales, a sanctified world in which everything is possible. Storytellers often used phrases of varying length to place their audience into the most receptive state for listening. Paul Delarue transcribed an actual dialogue established between the storyteller and his audience preparing to listen to the tale of Jean Le Tenu, Crusty John, in Upper Brittany. Here we go. Trick, track, clog. Serving spoon, shoe from Dieppe. Walk with them, walk today, walk tomorrow, for by walking you will go a long way. When I knock on the door, everyone opens. The more I say, the more I lie. No one pays me a penny for telling them the truth. Once upon a time, a long time ago, there was a man and a woman. Just as with the 3 knocks that in French theatre signal the curtain is about to be raised on an adventure that is not everyday life, these ice-breaking phrases before the story open the minds of the audience to worlds in which everyday logic gives way to the simple pleasure of listening. All right, now we look at the origin of the tales. Since the 19th century, there has been a greater interest in discovering the origin of these fairy tales, whose themes have circulated among various people for time beyond reckoning. During the time of the Grimm brothers, it was believed that the tales contained remnants of the myths of the Arias, that ancient folk who allegedly lived in the highest plateau of Central Asia. Okay, it is basically Indian, guys. And from whom the Aryans descended. These Aryans were considered to be the ancestors of the people of India, and the bulk of those living in Europe, hence Indo-European. When scattering throughout Europe, the Arias spread the themes of their now forgotten mythology, which found a new home in folk tales. Koskin destroyed that hypothesis by noting the existence of identical themes in the tales of the majority of the non-Aryan peoples scattered throughout the European continent. His research following the texts back through history led him to the Mongol tribes north of India. However, it is still legitimate to wonder from where the Mongols had drawn the themes of their stories, and why these themes were universally adopted over the centuries by such a diversity of cultures and mentalities, without seeking to give new life to the often fanciful 19th century theories of mythical interpretations that Koskin condemned so helpfully. We are led to acknowledge as the origin of folk tales an omnipresent inspiration unaffected by place, time, and even cultural environment. Rather than looking in this or that country or civilization, whether civilized or primitive, we should probably be seeking these origins in the domain of certain images. Images that Carl Gustav Jung called primordial, insofar as they are peculiar to whole species, and if they ever originated in their origin, must have coincided at least with the beginning of the species. Fairy tales, writes Marie-Louise von France, are poetic creations of the folk storyteller who draws the inspiration from the well of all poets, the collective unconscious. And I want to bring up Marie-Louise von France. I forgot to put her tab up because that is a quote that yanks my crank. Marie-Louise von France, 1915 to 1998, was a Swiss Jungian psychologist and scholar known for her psychological interpretations of fairy tales and of alchemical manuscripts. She worked and collaborated with Carl Jung from 1933, when she met him, until he died in 1961. Now I'm just going to say this once more. This is her quote. Fairy tales are poetic creations of the folk storyteller who draws his inspiration from the well of all the poets, the collective unconscious. Pretty cool. So yeah, I agree with this guy here that it's not necessarily coming from one particular place, and that's how different regions had similar stories. But I think it says a lot about the behavior of the people, how they acted. Were they moral? Did they care about kids? Did they exercise their patience to grow their intuition? Did they, have a reverence for the kids? Because these tales are, I think they're child-centric. I think they're family-centric. I think that they're for everyone to be able to hear. And I think that meant including young children, or respecting them at least the same level as adults, which generally majority of people do not do today, even people that think they don't. Yeah. So like a deep respect for children, and a deep respect for natural law, for the universe, for God, for the creation, for doing the right thing, and thinking of preserving knowledge and stuff like that. So with the right heart, perhaps the right symbols came to them. That's what I've always really thought about this. So I agree with this guy's opinion here. So we're gonna slug this book out, guys. And for me, flying through the hour, 1:45, the top of the hour. All right. To designate the corpus of traditional tales, each language coined expressions peculiar to itself. Examination of some of these, among those given in French, seems capable of providing valuable clues for what direction to take in order to come close to the sources of their inspiration. All right, so how did Tales of Wonder get their name? I am curious about this. The origin of the French noun conte, I think it's just conte, C-O-N-T-E, tale, has some surprising elements. It can be found in the 11th century Song of Roland, where it means calculation. And at the end of the 12th century in the work of Jean Baudel, where it means narrative. Like the contemporary rende compte, once meant paying off a debt as well as telling a story. Reading things in French, it's like reading it, it's not like how it looks. Oh dear, I did French for 2 years in secondary school, and I did not care. I was a terrible student. I was very naughty. From the Latin computo, cont, I've got reservations about saying that word. It means something else down here. I have to do a thick French accent so it doesn't sound like something else. From the Latin computo, I reckon, did not take its current form for the meaning of calculate, compt, until the 13th century, which it did to distinguish it from conte, in the sense of story. In short, both conte and compt were derived from a Latin word meaning to calculate. A comparable situation exists in Spanish, where cuenta. Wait, in Spanish is it suenta? I don't know. Cuenta. Cuenta is an account, and cuento, a story. What could be the relationship between an operation of pure discursive logic like a calculation and a fairy tale? And this is what I think is amazing about fairy tales. The Latin etymology of the word can help us find an answer. The verb computo is formed from puto, puto, which, depending on the context, can mean I clean, I make clear, I evaluate, I appraise, I think, I imagine, I suppose, or I believe, and is combined with the prefix com, equivalent to the preposition cum, which carries the idea of a spatial, temporal, or causal support. Well, so it was always there, right? With his famous cogito ergo sum, the philosopher, mathematician, and writer René Descartes expressed his conviction of finding the proof of his own individual existence in the movement of his thoughts. Cogito can, I don't know why I'm saying that like like a Mexican. Cogito can in fact be translated literally as I shake with myself. In other words, as I shake thoughts inside myself. Thoughts that are in discussion, if not more precisely in conflict with each other. Computo does not include this idea of contentious agitation, no more than it presumes doubt. The numbers on which an account is based do not converse among themselves any more than sensations, feelings, or mystical or imaginary experiences do. In this sense, an account/tale is always true because, like the account/tally, it is based on innate primordial convictions within the person, convictions without which the notions of thought or the individual have no meaning. Like numbers, the themes around which the tales handed down through the generations revolve were born with humanity, or perhaps it is thanks to them that humanity came into existence. Like numbers, these themes form part of the foundations on which humanity relied to emerge from the animal kingdom. The same kinship existing between compt and conte, bear with me folks, can be found in the Old English tall, which has the meanings of words, as well as the German Zahlen, to count, and Esrahlen, recount, but for what we commonly call a fairy tale. The Germans used the noun Märchen. This word was once spelled it was spelled differently. The diminutive of Mar, which is designated both a tale of this nature and a bad horse. There are many old European tales in which the hero must set off on his adventure riding a lame donkey. Some aged
Rocinante, who proves to be, during all the ordeals suffered by the protagonist, the most prestigious of steeds, and often her rider's wisest counsellor, the German tongue, was clever enough to combine with the image of the tale that of a very old mount, an aged and despised vehicle that carries as its insignia words that come down from the depths of the millennia. And are we so sure that this old horse, depicted in some tales as the one ridden in the prime of youth by the sovereign father on the day of his marriage, was such an object of scorn? It is this poor nag who was given to the prince, entrusted with the mission of going to the ends of the earth in search of the brother or a former comrade in arms of the old king. This display of derision was never anything more than simple-minded snobism, bourgeois ignorance, or fear when confronted by the unknown of a mysterious domain. It was never influenced by the great authors whose multiple borrowings from the popular stories are common knowledge. These stories have been called blue stories, tales of Mother Goose, old wives' tales, cock and bull stories, stories of the stork, airy tales, donkey skin tales, fairy tales, and so forth. Well, this really tickles my fancy, guys. So basically that chapter, hard to read. There was German and French in there, and you just had to put up with me struggling through that. But the point of the story is that fairy tales, the term for fairy tales, inside the term there, through looking at other languages, the author here, maybe he is, I forgot where he's from, but he's looking at French, right? This was written in French, so he must be French. I think I already said that. But the point is that looking at different languages and the etymology of words, the fairy tale itself implies that it's something more than just a story. It implies that it's something for figuring out, and it's something that is true, or it has truth inside it, and it requires, for lack of a better word, meditation. Contemplation is the word I'm looking for there. It requires contemplation. It requires a bit of effort and thought to figure out what it really is all about. So, fairy tale in itself, the term fairy tale comes from that place. And, with Otherworld Connections, that's kind of where, in the intro where I say angels and fairies, I think that's really what fairies, I mean by that, rather than actual, winged little tiny creatures in the forest. It's more what they want, or what that symbolizes. And working with things like fairies and angels is implying that you have intuition, and you are using intuition, and you are working with things that you can't see to create a better reality for yourself. And it's like a cause and effect kind of thing. So running out of time, and Sarah Cross is in the chat. Hey Sarah, enjoyed your show. I caught the last sort of half hour of that, and I am reading. Yes, thank you. Good question, because I get all jumbled up in my show. I have been reading The Initiatory Path in Fairy Tales, The Alchemical Secrets of Mother Goose by Bernard Roger. And I just can't believe I never found this book, looking for books exactly of this ilk. And this is to corroborate the stuff that I've been doing in the last few months on the show. And it's all good, and it's all really excited. So, to sum it up, I would say, like Sarah Cross said, get your voice recorded on tape, and maybe come join Revolution Radio. There are slots available. It'd be good to put your voice out there and listen back as part of your shadow work. And
And that's that. Take care, everyone. See you later.